I do just want to thank you guys for showing up, because I know we've had a long conference and there's been a lot of awesome information that we've heard, but I really appreciate it that you decided to come to my presentation to round out the conference. So today I want to talk to you guys about what a feminist looks like. And as we look at this issue, we're going to be trying to find the middle ground that exists within feminism. So what comes to your mind when you hear the word feminist? Maybe you know people who say that they're feminists, or you consider yourself to be a feminist. But really, this term has become one that we use almost daily, but people still have a lot of different connotations that they attach to it. And when you say the word feminist, depending on who you're talking to, people are going to think of a lot of different things. So it really depends on who you're asking what you think being a feminist means. You might think that you're, getting out there in these protests and getting in trouble with the cops, or if you're telling your parents that you're a feminist, they might think that you're going to, go into business and become successful. Society might think that you're out there standing on street corners and burning bras. Mansplainers, when I found this picture, I didn't know what a mansplainer was, so I looked it up. Basically, to mansplain is to condescend or patronize somebody, especially when you're explaining something to them. So I'll let you guys use your imagination on what you think mansplainers are thinking feminists do. You might think that if you're a feminist, you're really just uniting the world and making it a better place. The reality is probably that you're checking Facebook when you're supposed to be doing homework. Obviously, there are a lot of different views of what it means to be a feminist. And this word has really become a very loaded term, where everyone brings their own idea to what that word means, whether that's a positive or a negative idea. And I think that all of these different connotations that we attach to this word end up having a very polarizing effect on people, because depending on what they think it means to be a feminist, they're going to be agreeing or disagreeing with each other. And they feel like they have to be on different sides of the issue, and it starts all these arguments and debates. And they seem, when they're on these different sides of the argument, they seem like they're in complete opposition to each other. But I don't think that this has to be the case. I believe that a common ground where people who seem to be at odds can stand together does exist, and exists at the heart of feminism, which is really just a belief in equality. So in order to understand why people don't need to be divided, we need to understand why they are divided. And in order to understand this, we really have to look at what feminism is and where it's been in the past. Now, I know that this is a huge issue. It's just a giant topic. And I can't really cover everything in one presentation, honestly. So today we're going to briefly look at feminism's basic definition and kind of the history of the movement. We'll look at some of the developments and changes within feminism through the specific topic of when women choose whether or not they're going to stay at home and raise a family. And we're going to look at some hesitation that different groups have to accept feminism and the ways that they might be accepting it anyways. So as we look at all of these things, we're going to try to see if there is a middle ground within feminism where people who seem to be on different sides of the issue can actually agree with each other. So we have to ask, what's in a name? And it's my good friend Inigo Montoya from Maybe the Princess Bride would say, you keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. And that's just kind of how feminism goes. It's one of those terms that everyone uses it, but they all mean something different by it. So we really have to look at the basic definition of feminism. Merriam-Webster defines feminism as the theory of the political, economic, and social equality of the sexes. It can also refer to organized activity on behalf of women's rights and interests. Stacey Floyd Thomas, in her article called Feminism in Overview, explains that feminism is an established movement that seeks the liberation of women from sexist oppression. Heather Pristash is a professor at Western Wyoming Community College, where I go to school, and she has taught a lot of women's literature courses, and she is a self-identified feminist. So as I was doing this research, I was able to interview her, and she explained that there is no one single feminism. There are many, many different versions of it that have existed at various historical points. So to understand really what she means by this, we have to look at a brief history of what feminism is as a movement. Most people divide kind of this movement of feminism into three waves. So you have the first wave, and this began during the 1800s when women were fighting for the right to vote. So this part of the movement really just focused on women's suffrage, and that was granted with the passing of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. Some people looking at the first wave also think that this includes the time during the World Wars, when women were going to work in factories because all of the men were fighting overseas. And this gave, oh, there's the page. That's funny. Then this time during the World Wars gave rise to this character and kind of symbol of Rosie the Riveter. And this time period just showed that women had the ability to work in these positions that had previously been held only by men. The second wave of feminism began in the 1960s, and it took on a little bit more radical of an approach as women were fighting alongside the civil rights movement and other similar movements at that time. And they were just really asserting their authority by rejecting all the ideas that came along with a patriarchal society. And I think they became a lot more vocal at this time through all of their rallies and demonstrations. The third wave of feminism is a little bit harder to define. A lot of people think that we're still in the third wave of feminism right now, and it's kind of an ongoing thing. And basically, it just continues from where the second wave left off, but women are just fighting against more specific and individual ideas and policies that they find to be oppressing. So feminism has really just, over time, since the 1800s, grown and developed as a movement, as a whole, in our country specifically. And throughout all this time that it's been developing, there have been a lot of very specific issues, like the right to vote, that have been called into question. And it's funny because we see feminism as this overall movement, but really, with all of these specific issues that it's addressed, there have been a lot of different opinions and arguments on all sides, and a lot of disagreeing opinions. And as all of these issues have been addressed and people have come to them with their own ideas, that has really affected how people view feminism as a whole, and whether or not they're willing to accept it. So as one example of that, we're going to look at the topic of staying at home. So the question of whether or not women should be stay-at-home moms, which has kind of become a loaded term in and of itself, it's received a lot of attention in the past, and it's received a lot of very different opinions too. There have been, especially at the beginning, a lot of very negative perceptions of a woman who chooses to stay at home and raise a family. In The Married Woman, which was written by Simone de Beauvoir from her book The Second Sex, which was published in 1949, she really strongly criticizes the role of a housewife. She says that housework is just meaningless. It's like a futile battle that you can never win. So it just kind of drives the housewife crazy and makes her totally dependent on her family and gives her no independence. And it takes her to this point where she becomes, as Simone de Beauvoir put it, subordinate, secondary, and parasitic, which is a little harsh, but that was, she felt really strongly about how housework just really was restricting the woman. Anne Oakley believes that biological motherhood is a myth with an oppressive purpose, and that women are pressured by societal expectations into a very restrictive type of motherhood that is against their wills and making them unhappy. And all of these various responses that have happened in the past that have looked at staying at home as just being ridiculous or oppressive or a completely unfulfilling decision are really mostly stemming from this very complex emotional reaction that was rooted in second wave feminism. When I was talking to Heather Pistache about this, she explained that during mainstream feminism's second wave, one of the biggest things that people were fighting against was the societal expectation that a woman's place was in the home. So basically, these women felt like society was telling them, this is your only option. Your only choice is to stay at home, raise kids, be a mom. And they felt so restricted by that, that that was the only choice that was available to them, that, as Heather said, it might be understandable then that feminists of that era looked down on the entire concept of women staying at home. So again, this negative response was really just a very strong revolt against the societal expectations at that time. I think that I understand where this emotional response was coming from, that women felt like they shouldn't be restricted into only having one choice. But I think that at this time, feminism might have been trying so strongly to free women that it ended up pushing a little too far and actually restricting them, because it pretty much closed off the option of being a stay-at-home mom for the women who wanted to choose that. But there's a lot of debate as to whether or not this is still the case. Especially in recent years, there has been kind of a move in feminism towards being more accepting of a woman who chooses to just stay at home and care for her family, so long as this is the choice that she is making. In The Wife Today, which is from the 2001 book History of the Wife, Marilyn Yalone acknowledges that there are some women who prefer to be the domestic anchor for their husbands and children, and this is their choice. Then Adrienne Rich follows that up, saying that there is a world of difference between women's deciding who, how, when, and where to mother, and men's making these decisions for women. When I was talking to Heather Christash, I think she summed this up and summed up a lot of people's opinion by saying that she felt that women have the right to be anything that they choose to be, and the only problem with any role that they choose is when they have been forced into that role by someone else. Another professor at Western is Dr. Jessica Clark, and she is an amazingly smart woman. She has a lot of different degrees. She holds a PhD in history, and she is a self-identified feminist, but she is also a wife and a mother of a very young daughter, and she is balancing her work as a professor with her role as a mother and wife. And I interviewed her, and she stated very confidently that it is a misperception that you cannot have a family and be a feminist. So I think that the general feminist attitude today seems to support this idea that women can either choose to stay at home full-time or not to stay at home, so long as this is the choice that they're making. Unfortunately, this is kind of the ideal attitude of acceptance, that we're going to accept whatever women choose to be. But I think that because of the strong attitudes against choosing to stay at home in feminism's past, a lot of women still feel like they're being looked down on or criticized if they choose to stay at home. I did a lot of interviews while I was doing this research. I also interviewed Nicole Elliott, who is a Christian mom of 2 young children. She's working from home, and she was explaining to me that when she was pregnant with her first child, and she was telling the women that she worked with that she was about to quit her job and didn't intend to work full-time, they just completely did not understand her decision at all. She said, when I told them that I didn't intend to ever work full-time again, they all looked at me like I must have completely lost all my marbles. And I think a lot of people feel this kind of frustration, feel that people don't understand why they would ever want to choose something like that. I think that this feeling of frustration of being demeaned because of the choices you make is summed up really well in a song that's called Just a Housewife, and it's from the musical Working. And I want to show you guys a clip right now of this song, if I can get it to work.
Control click.
Okay.
It should work.
It's not. I swear, I think I found it when it was a full slide before, but I don't see the cursor. There it is. Sorry, guys. All right, should we quit from this song?
It's just a housewife. 7, 8, 9. All I am is just a housewife. Just a housewife. Nothing great. What I do is out of fashion. What I feel is out of date.
So I feel like this feeling that people get sometimes that feminism as a whole is really criticizing the choices they make is part of the hesitation that people feel towards accepting feminism at all. And a lot of people have this very negative view of feminism as a whole, as a movement, and so that makes them hesitant to accept anything that comes with the label feminist attached to it. And I think that there are a lot of different reasons for this, and this kind of confusion that comes with that. Part of it, I think, is the fact that feminism has tried to grapple with a lot of different controversial issues, and when people have different agreements on it, it just, like I said before, creates this very polarizing effect where they feel like they're on different sides of the argument and can't agree with each other. And so it's easier to just reject that as a whole and to not deal with it, basically. I think that it can come from misunderstanding some of the arguments that feminism has tried to make, or even just associating feminism as a whole only with the more radical aspects of the movement. And especially among religious groups particularly, feminism has become a powerful symbol for the secular liberalism that religious conservatives are supposedly revolting against. And that's a quote from Crystal Manning. And basically what she's saying is that feminism has become this symbol of a radical movement of liberalism, and when conservative groups see that, they just kind of reject the whole thing. I think that we have to think about how it's easy for conservatives to group all things that are labeled feminist together into one big group. It's also easy to group all things that are labeled as conservative into one big group, and there are really a wide variety of responses that are labeled as being conservative. When I was reading The Wife Today by Marilyn Yalom, she was examining some of the negative responses to feminism that came from the 1980s. And she said, every societal revolution has a conservative reaction that eventually forces it to retreat partially, if not wholly, from acquired ground. But as she talked about some of the specific reactions that had, fought against feminism, they varied from people debating abortion rights to people promoting the objectification of women's bodies in order to promote femininity. And I just don't think that these different reactions are coming from groups that would agree with each other. So I think we have to understand that these conservative reactions cover a wide span too. And as we look at this, I think when we group all the conservative reactions, we just see all of these groups that are completely opposed to the idea of feminism. But some of the groups that seem the most opposed are really just trying to figure out how to respond to feminism and what to accept or not accept from feminism. And I think that we really see this particularly in a variety of conservative religious groups who are trying to figure out where feminism fits in with their faith. There's a book that is called God Gave Us the Right, Conservative Catholic, Evangelical Protestant, and Orthodox Jewish Women Grapple with Feminism. And in this book, the author, Crystal Manning, examines these three different conservative religious communities to see what areas of feminism they disagree with or actually agree with. And there are resources like this and plenty of other resources, some even coming out of these conservative groups themselves, that try to look at where these groups stand in their relationship with feminism. And I think that a lot of individuals from these conservative communities, as I said before, they just see feminism as a whole and accept it, or reject it, sorry. And I personally come out of a very conservative fundamental Baptist community. So I personally know a lot of people who have done this, who have just been like, it's feminism, it's bad, and they just automatically push it away and think that it completely disagrees in every way with what they believe and with what I believe. But as I've examined it, I really don't think that this is the case at all. Crystal Manning was speaking with the members of these three different religious groups that she examined, and as she talked to them, she realized that their reaction to feminism really wasn't a rejection of feminism at all. And she came to the conclusion that contrary to what secular feminists and conservative religious leaders would have us believe, there is a feminist movement within conservative communities, and many of the leaders of those communities have incorporated feminist ideas into their rhetoric. So basically, she concluded that feminism and conservative religion then are not entirely incompatible. And I think that slowly but surely, the individuals that are within these conservative religious groups are coming to understand and accept the concept that faith and feminism are not polar opposites. One example is the blog called Practical Theology for Women, and this is a blog that's run by a woman from a Presbyterian church in Seattle, and she was discussing how many different aspects that fall under this curtain of feminism are really supported by a Christian worldview. And she said, I believe that not only can you love and obey Scripture and also embrace feminism, but that there are movements under the umbrella of feminism that Scripture compels us to embrace. So I think that this all shows that these groups that we see as being strongly opposed to feminism are really just trying to find this stance where their beliefs are in harmony with different feminist values. And many times these people are already standing in this position and they just don't realize it. So with all of this in mind, thinking about how feminism has developed, how there are different attitudes towards specific ideas, and why people are hesitant to accept it, we have to try to think about if this middle ground even exists. And I think that this middle ground, where groups who have various beliefs and opinions can actually find a pretty solid agreement, is found very simply in the belief in equal treatment, which is really the bottom line. A lot of people will say that, oh, I'm not a feminist, because it's that term that has all of these misconceptions with it that has kind of scared them away, so they don't want to label themselves as a feminist. But they're really going to readily agree with a lot of things that feminism has fought to defend in the past, like a woman's right to work and keep the money that she earns, or to own property, or even just to wear pants. Like, these people will support those ideas. So even if they're not willing to claim the name of feminist, basically Dr. Jessica Clark put it this way. She said, if you believe in equality and women's rights, you are most definitely a feminist. And it really just comes down to getting rid of the connotations that have been attached to the word and finding the basic definition of feminism, which is that belief in human equality. And I'm sure that just in this room, I mean, we don't have a huge crowd, but even just in this room, there are so many different opinions about this issue, about what it means. And I don't know where you guys are at on this. Maybe you supported feminism in the past and you've been really frustrated with people who seem hesitant to accept it or to agree with it. Maybe you've looked at feminism and thought, I don't know, that's a little bit too radical for me, and just kind of shied away from the term. Maybe you thought that this issue just didn't, pertain to you at all, didn't affect you. But really, this is just a fight for equality, and that affects all of us, no matter who we are or what we believe. So we have to think, what does a feminist look like? Basically, a feminist can be anyone. So I realize that there are a lot of disagreements over the specific ideas that feminism deals with. And I realize that we aren't going to be able to find a point where everybody agrees on every issue. But I think that it's this understanding and support of equal treatment of men and women that really defines the nature of what feminism is. And that's just kind of the bottom line. And this provides a very solid middle ground of understanding between all these different groups. So in this respect, I feel that all of us, no matter what the differences are between our genders, our ages, our beliefs, our backgrounds, all of us, when we consider the basic definition of feminism, what it means, we should be able to proudly consider ourselves to be feminists. Thank you, guys.
You're talking about the different waves of feminism. I was just wondering, did you see a theme in the things that maybe kick-started the waves of feminism? Like, was there a specific event that happened and then, like, the second or the third wave began?
I think it's interesting. I think a lot of it people attach to the specific issues that women are fighting for, like how the first wave, it really got kick-started with the right to vote. Like, that was just this radical idea that kind of changed everything. And then I think it partially has to do with the time period, what was going on in history, and with the specific issues that women are fighting for. And I think there's a lot of disagreement, too, over what the waves of feminism were specifically. But it's just kind of a way to break up the movement and really the issues that it's addressed, I think.
I'm just wondering, are you thinking of taking this research somewhere else? Or
I would like to.
what were you thinking?
I don't know. Like I said, I do come out of a very conservative Baptist community and base, and I would like to share it with a lot of people there, because they're the people that kind of hear that term feminism and attach it to a lot of things that we disagree with. And it's really hard for me to label myself as a feminist because that's what they think of. And so I would like to be able to take it to them and try to discuss it and, to say, okay, I know that there are a lot of things attached to this that we don't agree with, but a lot of the values in feminism I think we very strongly would agree with and should fight for. So I would like to try to take it to them a little bit more and see what they think. Yeah.
Maybe after you give your presentation, your history, and the points of your faith and feminism, you have some little stickers that say, "This is what a feminist looks like."
That is
Yeah.
It's a church.
Yeah. Just roll up
With
right.
pins?
But you're very correct. It's
Thank you. It's hard. It's a tricky issue because, like I said, it is so polarizing and everyone has so many connotations that they attach to it that when you try to explain what you're getting at, you're like, yeah, I'm doing a presentation on feminism. And they're like,